Hello, and welcome to an evening that is very close to my heart. My name is Sophie Aschheim. I am a rising senior at Yale University, and I am very excited to welcome you to an evening with Melissa Berton and Anita Diamant at Park Avenue Synagogue. So the reason I am up here is because I was named in this synagogue. I attended the ECC from ages 2 to 4. I went to Hebrew school 3 days a week and met my best friend in 3rd grade here. I was also bat mitzvahed on this bima and spent most of my life running somewhere around these halls. And my whole family has been a part of Park Avenue Synagogue for as long as I can remember. And so that is one of the reasons that I am incredibly excited to be here tonight. The other is that when I was 14, we moved to Los Angeles, and I was able to join a different community. While I was incredibly sad to have left Park Avenue behind, not only did I keep my childhood best friend and all the connections I had to the synagogue, I was able to meet some really amazing and wonderful people, one of whom is on this stage. My 10th grade English teacher, Melissa Berton, approached me one day and asked if I would read this article and then come talk to her, and it was very hush-hush. And I thought I was being inducted into the mafia. I wasn't. That's really good to point out. I wasn't. But the article introduced me to the concept of period poverty, which is something that I was fortunate enough to have never experienced and ignorant enough to have never thought about. And when you think about it for about more than 45 seconds, it makes a lot of sense that those experiencing homelessness, those who are low income, who cannot afford basic necessities like food or rent, or who cannot comfortably manage any sort of lifestyle, would also not be able to afford period care products. Because if you can't afford food, or if you have to make a choice between food and other necessities, food is always going to win. Education is always going to win. And something that is very easy to let slide is something we also don't talk about, which is periods and how we manage them. And that is mostly thanks to a stigma that has been around for thousands and thousands and thousands of years that we are just now starting to undo. And it has taken a lot of work from an amazing community of activists and educators and writers and everyone you see around you. So Melissa pulled me aside and talked to me about period poverty and said that the community that we shared, the school that we were in community with in a rural village about an hour outside of Delhi, India, was also experiencing period poverty, and that was the reason that a lot of the girls that we would Skype with would no longer come to school. And that was the reason that we would no longer see them when we did book clubs over Skype, way before the Zoom era. And suddenly a lot of things started to click. And it was very hard to imagine the emotional toll that would also take on a person, because to manage your physical and personal hygiene with dignity should never be in question, but for millions of people across the country and across the world, it is. And so a collection of students and I, along with Melissa, our intrepid English teacher, started an organization called the PAD Project. What started as a Kickstarter fundraising campaign online and a bunch of high schoolers meeting in room F at Oakwood School in Los Angeles eventually became an international nonprofit, which is thanks to the work of so many amazing and wonderful people. And along the way, we created a documentary about the community we were working with in India. The documentary, Period End of Sentence, which can be found on Netflix, shows the story of a really powerful and amazing group of women who see the change that can happen when we talk about periods and when we provide for them. And that documentary won an Academy Award, which launched the PAD Project from a high school project to fully fledged nonprofit. And along the way, we caught the attention of Anita Diamant, one of, the most prolific writers, especially of the American Jewish community, someone that I had always heard of and known. And we were able to work on a collaboration with her and create Period End of Sentence, the next chapter in the fight for menstrual equity, which is a wonderful book. And so tonight we are here to talk about all of those things and more. And I will stop talking now, but first give a quick introduction to Melissa Berton and Anita Diamant, two wonderful, amazing women who inspire me very much, and for whom I am really grateful that all of my worlds are colliding on this stage. So, without further ado, Melissa Berton is an Academy Award-winning producer for Best Documentary Short in 2019 for Period End of Sentence, and the founder and executive director of the PAD Project, a nonprofit organization dedicated to the principle that a period should end a sentence, not a girl's education. In recognition of her human rights work to promote menstrual equity, Berton received the 2019 Eleanor Roosevelt Global Women's Rights Award. She was also named one of Forbes 50 Over 50 Women Making Social Impact. Berton is a Los Angeles-based teacher and writer. Anita Diamant is the author of 13 books, most recently, Period End of Sentence, the new chapter in the fight for menstrual justice. Her first novel, New York Times bestseller, The Red Tent, has been published in more than 25 countries. Her other novels include The Boston Girl, Day After Night, The Last Days of Dogtown, and Good Harbor. Diamant has also written 6 nonfiction guides to contemporary Jewish life and a collection of essays. An award-winning journalist, her work has appeared in the Boston Globe magazine, Real Simple, Parenting, Boston Magazine, and WBUR's Cognoscenti. Anita lives in the Boston area and is the founding president of Mayim Haim Living Waters Community Mikvah and Education Center. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sophie, for that wonderful introduction. And I just also want to add my welcome to everybody who's here in person, to our online audience. We are so deeply grateful and excited that you are joining us tonight for what is such a critical and important conversation. So, and I just have to let you guys know that Anita and Melissa have worked together many times, but you are witnessing the first time they've met in person. So this is also a very special event and a special evening that we get to have them both.
We met in the women's restroom, fittingly.
Right, which is perfect. So thank you both for coming in from out of town for this evening and for this event. So let's start with you, Melissa. So Sophie talked a little bit about how you got her involved and the kids involved, but how did you get involved? What drew you to this in the first place?
Thank you for asking that question. First of all, I just want to say thank you so much for having me here at Park Avenue Synagogue and just tell this little story because it relates to those worlds colliding that Sophie was talking about. And I have to say that I was invited by another parent of a student where I teach, and that parent said, you have to go meet Rabbi Cosgrove at Park Avenue Synagogue. They knew I was going to be in New York. And not 2 minutes into the conversation, he said, wait a minute, I know all about the PAD project because Sophie Aschheim, she started that with you. I said, yes, she did. Well, she's a congregant here. So I just had to say that story. And it started very much for me with students and with students who were reading texts like we teach the Bible as literature in high school. And students were noticing that in some of the texts that we were teaching, women weren't being super well treated. And so those feminist students approached me to join an organization called Girls Learn International. That's an organization that seeks to educate girls to the same degree as boys around the world. As part of that, I became chaperone for a delegation of students to the United Nations, where I first learned about what is now called period poverty. It didn't have a name then. It wasn't called period poverty. This was in 2013. And Sophie gave the summary beautifully, as I knew she would, but things converged, and we were working with a community who wanted a pad machine in India, also members of Girls Learn International. And so we are a school in Hollywood, California, Oakwood School, and so we thought, what better way to raise awareness about period poverty than to fund a documentary. And we created that Kickstarter. Sophie, in fact, was the manager of that Kickstarter. It was a very exciting and crazy time waiting to see if we could fund it on what is really a very small amount for making a documentary, but we were able to do it. So I think you began your question with what moved me to be so invested in this issue. And I think it's because I'm with young women every day who sometimes join the PAD project now before they've even gotten their periods. And I think the idea that a period could prevent a young woman from continuing, or a girl from continuing her education, was something that I just couldn't brook. So we started this.
That's great. And I want to, in a minute, we'll get into a little bit more about what happens in the movie and what the movie's about. But Anita, how did you get involved with Melissa and with Period End of Sentence?
Well, it's from the movie, really. I watched the Academy Awards that night, and I leapt off my couch, and along with, lots of other movie stars at that event, and I was so thrilled. And I had actually written a couple of essays about menstrual products because of articles actually on the front page of the New York Times about women in Nepal dying as a result of being banished from their households during their menstrual cycles, and also because a high school student in my town, in Brookline, had written in an op-ed in her school paper, which turned into new policy for the whole town of Brookline, that there would be period products everywhere. So it was in my head, and then I got a phone call from my agent. They happened to be in New York doing the Today Show and the Good Morning shows and all those shows, but they also they were also looking for someone to write a companion book of some kind to continue publicity for this important project, because it lives and dies on people knowing about it. So I got a phone call, would you be interested? And I said I would be interested, and then we started a conversation and decided to continue, and then the pandemic happened, and this was my pandemic project. This is all I did.
I guess we're the beneficiary of your pandemic project. But I have to say that I said this to you earlier, Anita, that it seems to me that you were the perfect person to write the companion piece, because you wrote The Red Tent, which deals with this in many ways, and because you were the founder of Mayim Chaim, the mikvah in Boston. So many parts of your life, in addition to the articles that you talked about, feel like it was, looking back, it's like, well, of course they asked Anita Diamant, right? So,
it was the Red Tent, really, right?
Yeah.
It was the Red Tent.
No, the agent that she speaks of, she said, okay, well, who would write it? And Anita's was the first name that came to mind, because actually the director of the Feminist Majority Foundation, first of all, because I'm a fan and because I wanted that, but she was on top of mind because the director of the Feminist Majority Foundation, when we first started talking about the documentary, she says, there needs to be more written about this. She was telling me about period poverty and telling me about the inventor of the pad machine, and at the same time she was talking about the Red Tent. And so that was the name that came to me, so.
That's great. So let's talk a little bit about first the movie and then the book, because they are really companion pieces, because they are similar in topic matter, but actually very different in scope, actually. So for those who haven't seen the movie, I highly recommend it. It's on Netflix. It's 26 minutes. It's exceptional. And for those, and it won the Academy Award for Best Short Documentary. So Melissa, why don't you talk about what the movie is about?
The movie is about a group of women in Katikera, which is a rural village in northern India, and it's about a little bit about them before the pad machine arrives in the village, and some attitudes toward menstruation in the village, where some men think that it's a sickness. You see what happens. Then the pad machine arrives. At first, people in the village think that the pad machine might be making Huggies diapers because that's more acceptable. Later, people in the village learn that the pads, they're actually making pads for periods. Men start getting engaged in making the pads. Women, my favorite line in the movie comes from one woman who says, let me back up for a second. Pad machine comes, women make money making pads, make a little bit of a wage, and also pads become accessible. So that's what happens. In the process of this, one woman who has earned a wage says, usually a brother buys a sister a suit, but today I was able to buy a suit for my brother because I earned money. For me, that's a very important part of the movie, but also the attitudes toward menstruation change by the end of the film, and yeah, 26 minutes.
And just explain a little bit also to the people who aren't familiar what the pad machine is.
Okay, so the pad machine is made by an inventor named Muruganantham, who invented a machine that is about the size of this chair and this table, very small, unassuming, and it makes pads, which are mostly 93% biodegradable, depending on what you look at. They have an infrared light to make them sanitary. And now, by the way, pad machines have changed and improved, but a pad machine makes pads, in effect, so that if you cannot get pads readily available in a local market, if, for instance, you're in a village, or if you can't afford pads, then a pad machine is a good way to make and supply pads.
Great, great. And so what I loved about the movie was that it on so many levels, it was empowering the women because it gave women access to sanitary pads that they didn't otherwise have. And as you said, it empowered the women. The women became entrepreneurs. They worked at the pad, they got paid for making the pads, and they were out hustling the pads. They went door to door, knocking on doors saying, do you need these? And it was breaking down the taboos, but it was also giving the women a sense of pride and a sense of ownership in the work that they were doing at the same time.
100%, and I just want to add to that because I'm proud of this, so the machine that's in the film was around 2013, so it became outdated. We were able to get 2 new machines into the village, and now they are producing pads called fly pads. They've sold many thousands and thousands of pads in and around that area, so it's really wonderful.
It's amazing. And so, Anita, you saw the movie, like you yay Academy Awards, you saw the movie, and then how did you decide what book you wanted to write? Because there's a lot of ways you could have approached it. And so why don't you talk about how you thought about it and then the sort of scope out the arc of what's in the book a little bit.
We had these few conversations about travel, which would have been impossible anyway because I had 1 year to do this. But then the pandemic happened, so that ended. So I started just sort of collecting information as much as I possibly could, and I signed up for Google Alerts, Menstruation, and I felt like I was standing in front of a fire hose of information from all over the world. It was really, it still is, every single day. And I was learning things that I had not known before, and eye-opening and heartbreaking things around the world, not just in developing countries, but in this zip code and every zip code in the United States. And I was overwhelmed, I have to say, and it took me months to figure out how to organize things, and it changed. Actually, there were many different outlines, and we had conversations about this. So over time, there are chapter headings about, I have to look.
That's what it's there for.
Yeah, that's what it's here for. So the chapter headings are about, one is about shame and shamelessness, which you've talked a little bit about, and actually what Sophie talked about so beautifully before, about the way society doesn't talk about this and why. The second part of the book is actually one of my favorites, which is about indigenous wisdom, which is cultures where, non-Western cultures, where menstruation and menarche, starting one's period, are honored and considered normal and healthy. So it's really a lovely alternative to the way that a lot of the world deals with menstruation. Then there's a part called the struggle, about the work that's being done on the ground around getting rid of sales taxes on period products, talking about menstruation at work, and talking about dignity and the incredible activism. A lot of it spearheaded by young people. They are all over the country, not just the PAD project, but inspired by and in conversation with. They are really the leaders of this movement. Part 4 is about menstruation goes public, which is about how we are actually seeing a lot more mention of menstruation and periods and problems with periods and laughing at periods, thanks to the fact that there are a lot more women in Hollywood producing content and writing books and making jokes and bringing it into the light. There's a piece about men and menstruation. and about period.com. There's a huge industry on periods, and period.org, which is about the world of nonprofits working from many, many different directions to address this problem. And then there's sort of my wish list about what the world would look like if we really fixed all of this.
Great.
So that's what.
So let's break it down a little bit.
Those are the silos.
So,
yeah.
was there something when you said like there was eye-opening and shocking things? Were there one or two things that like sort of surprised you the most when you started doing this work and this research?
Oh, so much. One of the most horrifying, shocking ones was about women and menstruators who are imprisoned, and the unbelievable degradation that they undergo because they have a menstrual cycle. They don't have access to period products, or they say there's access, but you have to buy them at the commissary. They cost way too much. You have to make a choice again between a period product and calling your kids, because telephone calls from prisons are incredibly expensive. There have been many, many stories about prison guards extorting sexual favors in exchange for menstrual products, on and on and on. And these stories come from women who were incarcerated and have become advocates afterwards. So again, also just I was inspired by the fact that people are moved to do something. There was a woman there's a story in Canada, Ontario, and she was approached by a homeless woman asking her for money, and it occurred to her, what does she do when she has her period? So she started the Purse Project, and she collected purses and got all kinds of products and got the high school students and the church groups and the synagogue groups to participate. And then it came to the attention of a woman on the city council, who brought it to the city council, who made sure there were period products in the shelters around school. And now this continued because there are women in government to some extent, to a large extent. All of Ontario makes period products available in all public schools. And this was it's part of a larger movement. This started with one woman thinking with empathy about what does she do when it's her period, if she doesn't have money for food. So it's very powerful stuff.
Right, and which is so important, like both of you building awareness in each of your ways, right? So we have to first build awareness before we can make change, and the impact that you guys, that you're having on that, the public notoriety. I love that there's a line that you use in the book, Anita, like, so when they talk about menstruation, the curse, right? You talk about all the different names, and the euphemisms we use, like feminine products. Like, we try to hide it, we try to disguise it. It's been sort of in the closet for so long. And I love this line, menstruation is not the curse is shame, right? And for so many women, it's both overseas, but also here, how it impacts, it's not just overseas, it's here. Like this shame and stigma, and the need to have these conversations and say on camera, period, menstruation, like it's really important. It's really important to have those conversations and to break it down. And Anita, one of the things I was really struck about in the book also is you talk about not just women, like you want to talk about like the inclusivity of it. Yeah.
There's the term menstruator, which has been used a lot, and there's this sort of tagline, not all women menstruate and not all menstruators are women. There are people who don't identify as female or trans, and who also have uteruses and also have periods. So in the book, I explain it, there's a sort of a foreword about the language in the book, so I use menstruator, but I also use women and girls, because all menstruators, regardless of how they identify, suffer from the same misogyny and distrust of the body that bleeds. So they're interchangeable, and I know that doesn't make everybody happy, but that's the way I balanced this. So people who menstruate, women and girls, it's all in here.
Great. So Melissa, what's been the impact? Like so in terms of what have you heard back from the original movie and from people who've seen it, and from the village in India, and then from the winning the Academy Award? Like, do you feel that there's been more impact, there's been more recognition, that things have changed? What have you heard back?
100%. So much, which is terrific. And obviously not just the PAD project, but all of these voices rising together for to eradicate period poverty, or at least try to ameliorate it, and to support people who menstruate. What's been happening in the United States around policy, Anita was talking about what was happening in Canada. Just a month ago, the LA County Board of Supervisors made period products available in museums, public venues, parks, libraries, schools. We were reached, an assemblywoman from New Jersey reached out to me just yesterday to talk about.
Just passed a state law. I mean, it's happening.
So this is happening across the U.S. Speaking specifically about the PAD project, we started with one. I shared a little bit about what happened with the nonprofit that we worked with in the community, Action India. So the stars of the film, Sneha and Suman. Suman is the woman in whose house the PAD machine lived, and Sneha was the aspiring police officer. Both of them have become menstrual health advocates in and around Delhi, speaking on panels. Action India now houses a relatively big PAD machine social enterprise with fly pads. And then the PAD project, we began with one PAD machine in one country, and now we have PAD machines in 9 different countries, I think, or at least on the way. So we have a PAD machine in a women's hospital in Afghanistan, Nepal, Sri Lanka, Bangladesh, different regions in India. 2 just arrived in Kenya. That is very exciting. We also have what's called a washable pad program, which is a sustainable pad that you sew and make. So we support those programs as well as giving domestically in the United States. So many great grassroots partners. We have, my favorite latest thing is called a Leap of Faith grant. This is to a high school student often, or a college student who just wants to raise enough money so that in her school there can be enough pads or products. So they're about $500 grants. For instance, if any of you have gone and you've seen that, those libraries where you take a book and you put a book. So an enterprising young woman in her town, she set up a little library where you leave a box of product, or you take a box of product, and it's been a big hit, and she wanted a few $100s to keep that going. So just little projects like that to larger projects like getting pad machines to different countries. That's about how it's grown.
And so these are all wonderful stories of progress. Do you still run into, do you feel that you still encounter barriers, both domestically and internationally? Do you feel that there's still resistance to doing this work, to having these conversations, to being open about it?
There's resistance, but it's like, is it as important as X, Y, or Z? It's like there are so many needs. Everyone has so many needs, and is this really? Does it rise to the level of hunger? Does it rise to these other levels? But the more you talk to people about, if you think about the number of people in refugee camps, and there are people collecting actually products and sending them to Ukraine at the moment, and to refugees from Ukraine, but to be in a refugee camp where there are thousands and thousands of people, and there are no diapers, and there are no adult diapers, and there are no period products, and there are no safe bathrooms. This is a health problem. This is a crisis. Women are at risk of assault when they go out at night to use the bathroom, and there are no locks on the doors. I mean, this is I now understand what an intersectional issue is, and for menstruation, it includes water supply, it includes getting rid of products and how to do that safely, it includes safe bathrooms, it includes absolutely access all the time, and openness. So there are all these things that meet together, and there are so many organizations, the United Nations, and at Columbia, there's one of the great professors, do you remember her name? Marnie Summers, who's sort of the world expert who has been convening people in academia and in public policy. So there's a large conversation going on there that's not as visible, it's kind of academic, but they work with the United Nations and they work with other aid organizations. So it's bubbling up, it's there, it's going to take a long, we are fighting misogyny. I mean, this is not just...
Let's name it. Let's talk about the patriarchy. Let's talk about misogyny.
Well, let me just say, I use the word justice. Period poverty is one thing, but I think this is about justice and injustice. And so the injustice is done to people, to those of us who have bodies that bleed, that have a uterus, is ancient, is baked into our culture, and it's obvious everywhere, and we are living through another moment where the autonomy of women to have control of their bodies is again under attack. So it's all of a piece with that, and so it's a big one.
Melissa, it's a big one. No, I was going to say just culturally. So I don't know if any of you have seen Turning Red. It is a Pixar animated film where you could say that the period is analogous to this big red panda, like a literal red panda. It's a wonderful, wonderful film, sort of pushing the envelope around puberty and a girl growing up and grappling with getting her first period and emotions around period. And right after the film came out, which was recently, a very well-known reviewer, male of a certain age, said, this is not a universal issue. Nobody could relate to that cartoon image of a red panda. What is this? What he was saying was that nobody could relate to a 13-year-old girl. It's as though half of the world aren't women and girls who may one day get their periods, so will one day get their periods with luck. So right after he wrote that, there was a funny barb in the New Yorker that came out that said, and like animated cars are so relatable to everyone. But and I think, and I've shared this story before, but in the week before period end of sentence 1, another male member of the director's branch said, nobody will ever vote for a movie about periods because that's simply too icky. And this is the kind of response we've gotten all along, places where we would be able to talk about this in public. That's why I'm grateful, actually, to Park Avenue Synagogue. It's pretty cutting edge to be talking about menstruation in a synagogue anywhere. I often get resistance. No, okay, this is great that you're doing it, but let's not talk about it. So that comes from patriarchy. And as Anita was saying, it's because women have handled menstruation for so long, so seemingly ably, we forget that it cuts across, it really does impact. Women are selling their bodies for period products. Women are getting infections. Women can't afford to take care of themselves in that way. So it really is an issue that we need to call attention to.
I have to say that I've spoken at several synagogues and they've been just fine about it. So
yes.
Yeah, I've been very lucky that way. But the other thing about the secrecy around menstruation, and one of the dangers, is that women and girls who suffer great pain, and are told by their physicians, just take another couple of ibuprofen and a hot water bottle, you'll be fine. This is especially true for women of color whose pain is always minimized and dismissed. And there are people who have suffered excruciating menstrual pain for years and been dismissed, who find out that they have endometriosis or they have some other serious disease that should have been caught many years before and wasn't, because it wasn't taken seriously. It's just what happens. It's painful. Live with it. And sometimes it's not just painful. Live with it. Sometimes it's painful and die with it. So, it's not trivial. I mean, I think sometimes people think it's trivial, but it is anything but trivial.
So I want to just sort of layer onto that. So, in terms of the history and the patriarchy, the Jewish tradition has a lot to say about menstruation also. Anita's grimacing. So we have something in the tradition. So in the Torah, in Leviticus, it talks about a menstruant woman, a nida. And in the Torah, it says that a woman who menstruates is ritually impure for 7 days, from the onset of her period for 7 days. Men who have emissions are also ritually impure, and so it meant that there's certain things you couldn't do. You couldn't offer sacrifices. There's certain rituals that you're prohibited from when you are in this ritual impure state. What's interesting is that after the time of the Torah, when we get to the time of the rabbis of what we call the Mishnah and the Talmud, the Gemara, in the years sort of 0 to 600, the rabbis lengthen the time that women are ritually impure. The sort of ritual impurity of men seems to fade away and is not really discussed and talked about, but the ritual impurity of women and what women are allowed to do not only stays, but it's lengthened. So from the time of the Talmud, it's not 7 days from the onset of your period, it's 7 days from the end of your period. So you become now ritually impure for, depending on how long your period is, 12 to 14 days. You're not allowed to, so there's something called taharat mishpacha, which is the laws of family purity. You're not allowed to have intercourse for the days, and you actually then need to go to the mikvah, to a ritual bath, to then become pure again before you're able to do that. So it's the sort of the patriarchy extended this, and really the focus was much more on women than, as I said, on men. The issues with their emissions sort of changed. But one of the things I love about our tradition is the way we can continue to build and renew and reflect. So there's a wonderful rabbi, Elise Goldstein, who noticed that, like, in the Jewish tradition, there's a blessing for everything. Like I say, Tevye from Fiddler on the Roof, there's a blessing for everything. But that there's even a blessing for when we go to the bathroom. Every day we say a blessing for the ability to go to the bathroom, for being grateful for the ability to go to the bathroom, which is actually kind of miraculous. Our bodies are all miraculous. But there was not a blessing for menstruation. So she wrote one, which I just want to share because I think it's really important as a way to sort of acknowledge how things are changing and unfolding. So she crafted a blessing that says, blessed, so riffing on the morning blessings, blessed are you, Adonai, our God, ruler of the universe, who has made me a woman. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam she'asani isha. And what she does by who has made me a woman is, like, when you get your period, to say, like, thank you God for making me a woman. Thank you God for enabling me to do this. And Anita, you talk in the book about, like, as you said, like, there's rituals for when women get their periods, for women, but I know my daughter said when she got her period, she's like, "Are you going to slap me now, Mom?" I had never heard of this tradition. I said, "Wow. What are you talking about?" She goes, "I got my period. You're supposed to slap me."
That is so backwards, because when I talk in groups, usually young women have never heard of this, and it's the mothers whose grandmothers did it to someone before. So it's very interesting what people do hear and don't hear. There is nothing in Jewish tradition, Jewish law about slapping. It's purely folklore. It's a grandmother thing, and I can't tell you the number of people who said, "My mother slapped me a little bit," and I said, "Why did you do that?" And she said, "Well, my mother did it to me. I have no idea." So this is generations of doing something that is meaningless, essentially. People have tried to come up with positive spins on that. Good luck. I think it's don't get pregnant. Pretty much. Be careful from now on. But this is a tradition that for liberal Jews was abandoned pretty much wholesale because it was seen as anti-woman, as degrading. Mikvaot, buildings that housed mikvahs, were not nice places. They were, especially if you think about what life was like in Eastern Europe, what a mikvah looked like. It was cold and dark and dirty, and you had to go at night. Mikvah is the thing that your grandmother told you never to go to. It's not just, we're modern women. No, it was really largely abandoned and seen as insulting. And this was a big debate among Jewish feminists for a while, that this is absolutely irredeemable. Well, we figured out a way to redeem it by giving women control, not just women, but giving everybody who uses the mikvah control over when, how, what blessings you use, what blessings you don't use. Do you have a witness? Do you not have a witness? This is all within your control. And Carrie Bornstein, who's our executive director, our CEO actually, has the halacha to say that this is absolutely within halacha, that you are the person who is responsible for your own mitzvah of immersion. So we have reinvented the mikvah with respect for tradition, using tradition, but also understanding in really different terms. We have lesbian couples who come monthly. We have men who come monthly because with their partners. And people come for all sorts of different reasons. The end of childbearing, the end of nursing, before deciding to have a child, after marriage, saying, okay, we're ready. And people come for sad reasons too. Yeah. At the end of happy ending, at the end of an illness, at the end of cancer treatment, to heal after some kind of attack or accident. So we've taken the mikvah. This is what liberal Jews do, is with tradition and with love and with respect and with understanding and scholarship, remake it in a way that I think is consistent with its sanctity.
Beautiful, beautiful. So let's talk a little bit about going forward. Like, so what changes still need to happen? Like, what sort of are there things that we're still working on, we still need to work on? Like, where are the fights that we still need to fight? Where are the big battles still?
Well, I think I don't know how political we want to get, but just looking at the news and what's happening with women's agency over their own body right now, I think that menstrual rights are right up there with reproductive rights, and both of when a woman's agency over her own body is threatened, you can just see in a very scary, real way how far we need to go. This same world that says that periods make women dirty is the same world that says that a woman can't have control over her body.
Can I just add what you said about the seeing red?
Yeah.
There are schools that banned that and wouldn't permit. They didn't want their children seeing this because they didn't want them to learn about menstruation, because it was like that was beyond the pale. Yeah. So that's very much what you're talking about. Yeah.
I actually didn't know that there's schools that ban the movie.
Well, I don't know. There were articles saying, I'm not taking our children to this. It shouldn't be shown. It's inappropriate. So it's not going to be shown in certain schools, but they're not going to bring a first-run movie to schools. You're right, but there was real objection on the other end of what you were saying from religious conservatives who found this somehow offensive.
Yeah, and picking up on your statement earlier about Indigenous celebration, in your book, there's a film the PAD Project is working on called Long Line of Ladies, which does tell the story of a flower dance. The protagonist of this film is Ati. She's a 13-year-old girl in Northern California, and she is actually being celebrated in a ceremony over 4 days as she gets her period, because the community knows that she's about to get her period. This is a tradition that is being revitalized, and I test screened the film for my students, and all of them were in tears after seeing the film. It's a 20-minute film, look out for it, but they were in tears because they said, if this had happened to me, when I was in a bathroom crying while my friend made fun of me, in a Walgreens or whatever, like, it was something that was really not very celebrated when this happened to me. And so for them to see a whole community coming together to see this coming of age ceremony is really powerful, and I think that's the next place that we can go in period equity.
I didn't know about this.
Yeah.
Because I discovered it when I was working on this book in Northern California. I cannot wait to see this.
Yeah, long line of ladies.
Wow, great.
So I do want to give, I've got lots more questions, but I want to give the audience a chance to ask questions. If you have questions, just feel free to put up your hand, and Mara has a microphone. Does anyone have questions before I continue to? Yeah, great. Mara, we've got one back there.
When is that coming out? Thank you so much for being here. Incredibly admire your work, and just really thrilled to hear from both of you. Recently in Spain, there was legislation introduced providing paid leave for women who are suffering significant pain during their menstrual cycle. And I think there's maybe 4 other countries that have that. I was curious what your thoughts were.
Spain looks like it's going to pass a national law mandating period leave for those who want it from work. which is a radical proposal, and for many years was sort of whispered about. It's on the books in a lot of countries, but it's completely ignored. Like Japan, it's been on the books in Japan for many years. It's not used. The government doesn't have any, has no enforcement, and businesses there's no reason for them to do it, and women are afraid to ask for it because they're afraid they will lose their jobs. The idea of period leave it really splits feminists in a lot of ways, and it tends to go along age lines, that older women, I don't know where you can put that line, are afraid that it's going to cost women the progress we've made in terms of employment and benefits and all of that, and we're going to be seen as weaklings, and we're going to lose our rights. On the other side, young women are saying, no, why not? I mean, this is a normal function. Certainly if men had menstrual cramps, we'd have a 3-month work month. But for me, I come down on the yes, we have to discuss this, we have to consider this, because what we live in now is a world where you assume everybody has a male body, that this doesn't happen. It's like the reviewer in the New York Times who said, who's going to be interested in it? Well, half of the world is interested in this, thank you very much. And their mothers, and their fathers too, for that matter. So that if we start thinking about individuals as having different kinds of bodies, and also for the fact that women, for instance, do an enormous amount of unpaid labor, which they do on the side, even though they're working full-time, right? Like taking care of children and elders and food and everything else that we do. So if we actually took into account what people's lives were really like, wouldn't the workplace want to respond to that? And I want to say that businesses that have instituted some kind of period leave, which you don't have to take, and if you work in an office, sometimes people can work from home or take a half a day or take no days. It has not hurt productivity, but it has improved morale in the workplace. So, but again, this is a particular, for people who work in agriculture, for people who menstruate who work in agriculture, there is no period leave. There won't be. And people who work in factories in Nepal, there is no period leave. I mean, we're talking about a change that's going to happen from developed countries. I think it's interesting. I think it's a good debate to have, and I hope that at some point we can acknowledge that we need to take care of each other, and some of us need a day off. Not all women, not all people who menstruate, but some people need a day or two off in order to function. It's a debate.
Yeah.
So, while we're on this topic a little bit, we hit a little bit on the economics of it, but and so there's some legislation you guys have talked about. But do you want to talk a little bit about sort of the pink tax and what's happened in terms of economics? And Anita, you had a story in the book about a British member of Parliament who stood up publicly and said, my period costs me £500 a year.
Actually, she went into this woman she's Scottish. She said, I'm sorry, I'm late. I have my period, I had to go to the bathroom. And then she brought up the fact, I wish I could have been there. And nobody collapsed, They didn't drag her out. And then she went on to talk about how much it cost to have a period and how expensive it was and how it was a burden on women. So that made it really public. And for some people, and you said this before, and Sophie said it, if it's a choice between food and period products, it's got to be food. Yeah. And there are statistics, and some of them are cited in here, about the fact that so many women these are from the United States, miss work, miss school, and just also find it difficult to manage their periods because they can't afford it. Absolutely. And the tax is just part of it. The tax is a sales tax, and it's different in every city and state. Yeah. And so the legislatures have to decide, right, what are we going to charge and what are we not going to charge sales tax on?
Exactly.
So, and go ahead.
No, I was going to quote you in Mardi Gras. In New Orleans, Mardi Gras beads are not taxed, whereas period products are.
I think that changed.
Oh, Oh, that's
See, I mean, it's dated. I mean, this is happening so fast.
It is happening so fast. Gun club memberships in Wisconsin are not taxed, whereas period products are taxed. There are all kinds, in some states, Viagra is not taxed, whereas period products are taxed. It goes on, but I think that it's estimated, depending on which products you buy and how much you need, but an average menstruator will spend something like close to $7,000 in the lifetime for period products. And if you think about it, this is money that non-menstruating people won't have to pay. So if you are struggling to make ends meet, pay rent, that extra $13.25, that's what that number is predicated on, then you can see where it becomes a real hardship.
And it's also not just the products, it's also pain medication,
right?
It's underwear, it's all the things that go with menstruation, which that doesn't always get counted. Actually, Viagra and period products are, I think it's SNAP benefits. Will cover Viagra, and they didn't used to cover. I think they changed that during COVID. I think it may yet be made permanent. Diapers and period products were not SNAP eligible, so you had to, you didn't get any support for those.
SNAP is the equivalent of
food stamps.
For people who don't know the terminology. Okay, great. We have another question.
Hi. So we recently did a big fundraiser around this whole issue, and one of the things that we learned was that, or something that normalizes it, is that if people talk about it and tell stories, and I know you're both storytellers, so my question is, how do we do that? Like, how does that happen with young people maybe being uncomfortable? I think it was actually really probably even more important with young girls. So I'm just curious what you would say to us in the audience that are trying to bring awareness, talk about it. How would you do that in your community?
Well, first of all, brava, because you already are, and you just did a drive, so that is wonderful. And I think once one person just talks about it in conversation, other people do start talking about it. I've noticed first period stories are generally a pretty common place that people can bond over and talk about, but I think whatever your chosen mode of communication is, I mean, film has worked for the PAD project, but certainly writing and journaling and storytelling, but also just not being afraid to talk about it in regular situations is pretty brave. Like, to be honest, I still often feel shy about it.
When I started on this project and people said, "What are you working on?" And it was a man, and I would take a breath, and I'd said this twice, and then I stopped. And I said, "Well, I'm not sure you want to hear this." And then I heard myself, and I went, I said, I'm working on a book about menstruation. And they said, huh? And I would talk about the cost, for example, and lack of access. And I would say, it's the great line is, are you carrying a roll of toilet paper around with you? And a lot of people get it right then. And you don't have to be a menstruator to get that, to realize that, it's like toilet paper. It's a necessity. It's something that you don't decide to have once a month. I'm going to skip it this month because I can't afford it. And it really, if you can get over the internal, I don't know if I should talk about this, or I don't know if I should tell my sons about this. I hear that a lot from people. I can talk to my daughter, but I really don't want to. I don't know, how do I talk to my son about that? It's easier if your son has a couple of sisters who are older than him, because he's going to find out. But we need to talk about this more. We need to watch this movie with our families, including our sons and our male partners as well. There's a lot of great media, actually. Big Mouth, I don't know if you've seen this is a great animated show, Big Mouth, and there was a really hysterical episode about a girl getting her first period at summer camp. It happens to be written mostly by Jews, this show. Also, but so her pad, she fantasizes her pad becoming the size of a small boat when she goes swimming. Absolutely. But it's just, you laugh about it, but you know that this is happening to somebody, and she's embarrassed, and the boys ask, and it's a great icebreaker. And there are books, there are graphic novels for kids, there are books for young children. So there is material out there. And if you can actually get yourself to sit down with your family and watch one of these things together, it opens the door to a conversation.
And I think you said something really important, actually both of you, that and Anita, you talk about it in the book, it's got to be boys and girls, men and women, and gender, like however people identify, all genders, because and you talk about like how sex education was, the girls learned about periods, but the boys didn't, right? And in Melissa, in the movie, you interview you talked a little bit about it, but you interview the men, and they're they need to be educated too, and it's got to be, it's got to be normative. We have to keep, I remember my daughter was a teenager a few years ago, and she'd be like, I'm on my period now. And I'm like, you don't have to tell everyone in the room that, but you kind of do, I think that there's a certain, I think that some of us from the past are like, really? Does everyone in the room have to know that? But, but I think that that's part of the education, is not being afraid to say it, and to tell the stories is so important.
Yeah. There's this one commercial, and period product commercials in other countries are so great. There's one with many vignettes, but there's one where there's a group of really attractive young people at a dinner party, men and women all together, and this woman gets up and says, "Does anybody have a tampon?" And then someone hands her one, and it's it's nothing. It's absolute, but just to see that is both, it's shocking, and it's also like a breath of fresh air. It's no big deal. Yeah. Wouldn't it be great if it was no big deal?
I think we have one more question, and then we'll.
Hi. Do you think this could be taught in like Hebrew studies when you talk about the Torah? It could be for yeshivas, you can co-ed. I mean, it'd be pretty brave to do this and then show the film.
Yeah, I think that, I can't speak for Park Avenue Synagogue, but no, but because it's not my department. But like traditionally, in very traditional communities, this is a place where women would have kala, they would not even before kala training was bride training about like the laws of family purity and when you're allowed to have intercourse with your husband. It was very divided, and so I think that I think we need to do this like everywhere across, Jewish, non-Jewish, across it all.
Well, I've always thought that Hebrew school was a great place, or religious schools are a great place to bring up issues that are not talked about in public school or even at home, and that includes violence, and that includes harassment, and it includes bullying online. There are lots of issues that are moral issues that kids, teenagers in particular, need to air, and they need a safe space. And if it's in a Jewish space, that gives them I think it's a very loud and clear message that this is where you bring moral questions, pain of living in the world, and how do I respond to this in the world? And if we don't do it in synagogues, what is that saying? It's like we don't deal with the mess that you experience in your life. So I think it's a great opportunity to talk about, to do some sex education, to do some body awareness education, and to do it in a mixed group if possible.
Absolutely, and for bar and bat mitzvah projects, I know that Park Avenue Synagogue works with a great organization, Days for Girls, which gives pads to people around the world. The Pad Project also partners with Days for Girls, and so that's also a wonderful way to help people their same age get products that they need. So that's terrific.
So thank you, because what you just said, Anita, that's why we're doing it here. Like that's why we're doing this. That's why we're having the conversation here on the bima of Park Avenue Synagogue. It's why for Mitzvah Day we partnered with Days for Girls. So on Mitzvah Day, Days for Girls was here, and we made products that we made products that, so they're a partner. So the fact that we had them as a partner for Mitzvah Day, that for our pre-B'nai Mitzvah, people can give money to both organizations. Karen, it's like very much that's part of the message here at Park Avenue Synagogue.
I have to tell you that, and people are now sending me this, of girls during their bat mitzvah, Devar Torah, talk about menstruation. Yeah. And they talk about it in relation to whatever the Torah portion is. Sometimes it's not even necessarily related to it, but it's a justice issue, and they'll talk about it. And so people, rabbis, who I know, a lot of rabbis, and they send me these Devar Torahs, and these girls are talking to a big mixed crowd of people of all ages, and God bless them. They just don't see the shame in it anymore. And I think they're teaching us.
And that's what, so like everyone here, like, you know, that's the Torah that we all need to spread, right? So it's on us, but it's on all of you to keep, like, to have these conversations publicly, loudly, and proudly.
And I guarantee after this, if you haven't been thinking about this before, you'll see it everywhere.
So we're about out of time. I just a couple of things I want to mention. One is that Menstrual Hygiene Day is May 28th. And it's to bring awareness and to end taboos. That's one of the reasons we're having this program here in May. And we have a drive for menstrual products. We partner with the New York Common Pantry. We have a sandwich making program, and we are partnering with them on a drive for menstrual products starting actually last week until June 3rd. We'll have boxes, we have drop-off boxes, and we have an Amazon wish list if you want to give menstrual products that way. So please, please, please support the drive. Right after this, there'll be a book signing. We have books for sale. Anita's book is for sale. So join us for some schmooze. There's some cookies. You can, talk to our wonderful panelists.
Cookies.
Special cookies. Yes. Please check out the special cookies. So stay and schmooze for a while. Buy books and sign books. And I want to thank. So this program was in partnership with the Women's Network here at Park Avenue Synagogue. I want to thank our chairs, Nancy Lasher, Jenny Carroll, our outgoing vice chairs, Lindsay Sklar and Sherry Rosenfeld, our incoming vice chair, Judy Marcus, our outgoing officer, Nan Rubin, our incoming officer, Paula Gendel. It takes a village here at Park Avenue Synagogue. And of course, Sophie, for the great introduction and for all you do. And of course, by our amazing team that does all of the programming and education here, Mara Bernstein, who's here, Julie Schwartz is here, Catherine and Patricia, who work behind the scenes. It really, it takes a village, and we have an amazing village of people here. And I just want to close with a quote from this Rabbi Elise Goldstein, who I mentioned, wrote this, updated the ritual for women who have menstruation. And this is from the Women's Torah Commentary. She says, while we reject menstrual huts, a separation from the sancta, and antiquated notions of cleanliness, we can still emerge with a sense of the overwhelming mystery of life and death that is embodied in our corporeal female selves. We should reject the notion that menstruation makes a woman unclean, and instead think of this time as a period of intense electrical charges, the charges of life and death pulsing through our bodies. We should see menstrual blood as women's covenantal blood, just as the blood of Brit Milah, of ritual circumcision, is men's. For women too have a Brit, a covenant, not just once at 8 days old, but every single month. So to that I want to say amen and thank her for that beautiful quote. And thank you all for coming, and thank you to our amazing panelists. Thank you all for joining us.